Okay, so next topic is the Iwahig Penal Colony. So this facility was established during the American occupation. It was, however, during the Spanish regime that Puerto Princesa was designated as a place where offenders sentenced to banishment were exiled. A specific area of Puerto Princesa was selected as site for a correctional facility. So the American military carved out a prison facility in the rainforest of Puerto Princesa. The institution had for its first superintendent Lieutenant George Wolfe, a member of the U.S. Expeditionary Force who later became the first prison editor or director. So this is the Iwahig Prison and Penal Colony or Penal Farm. Governor Luke Wright, however, authorized the establishment of a penal colony in the province of Palawan in November 16, 1904. This penal settlement, which originally comprised an area of 22 hectares, originally served as a depository for prisoners who could not be accommodated at the Bilibid prison in Manila. So since the old Bilibid prison was overcrowded during that time, so Governor Luke Wright established this penal farm or penal colony, the Iwahig Penal Farm, wherein the prisoners who cannot be accommodated in the old Bilibid prison will be housed here. So in 1906, however, the Department of Commerce and Police, which later became the Department of Public Instruction, moved to turn the institution into the center of a penal colony. That's why the Iwahig is now the Iwahig Penal Farm and Colony. It was supervised in accordance with trends at the time. So through the department's efforts and the Philippine Commission on the United States Government passed Act number 1723 in 1907, classifying the settlement as a penal institution. So this is how the Iwahig Penal Colony looks like and how their prisoners enable or how their prisoners work during or while they are being convicted. So the settlement was at first based by attempted escapes, but under the supervision of Colonel John R. White of the Philippine Constabulary, who would become superintendent of Iwahig in 1906, the colony became a successful settlement. So before or long before the Iwahig has been established, there are a lot of escape issues that has been reported. So by the supervision of Colonel John R. White of the Philippine Constabulary, the escapes has been successfully settled. So a merit system was devised for the prisoners and vocational activities were offered. This included farming, fishing, forestry, carpentry, and hospital paramedical work. Prisoners could choose the vocational activities they wanted. So there are a lot of services offered by under the supervision of Colonel White. So there are a lot of choices wherein the prisoners can choose what kind of work they wanted to. So examples are fishing, farming, forestry, carpentry, and hospital paramedical work. So in 1955, Administrative Order number 20 was promulgated by the President and implemented by the Secretary of Justice and the Secretary of Agriculture and Natural Resources. So this order allowed the distribution of colony lands for cultivation by deserving colonists. So this Republic Act allowed the distribution of colony lands for cultivation for those who are deserving colonists. The order also contained a list of qualifications for colonists who wish to apply for a lot to cultivate, the conditions for the settlers stay in his land, loan requirements, and marketing of the settlers produce. Lots granted did not exist 6 hectares. So under this condition, the land should not exist um, beyond or should not exceed 6 hectares. On August 16, 1959, a committee was created by President Carlos P. Garcia to study the state of national prisons. Accordingly, prisoners in Iwahig were divided into two groups, just like the old Bilibid prison. The settlers, they called here the settlers and the colonists. So the settlers are those engaged in farming for their own benefit, and they are the ones whose applications for lands to cultivate have been approved. So they are called the settlers who who engage in farming for their own benefit. The government furnishes the land and initial requirements for tools, dwellings, and beasts of burden. So considering they um, have their own land already, they already passed the requirements, or what are the qualifications in having land or land for farming for their own benefit. So this is how the Iwahig Prison Penal Farm. They are required to reimburse expenditures incurred for their maintenance and that of their families out of the products of their farms. So there are also somehow receipt given, or reimbursement expenditures in their land that have been um, expended. So upon their release from the colony, they receive whatever amount of money they have credited in their favor after deducting the obligations they have. So these are the qualifications um, before the money has been released. It was already deducted by the obligations that has been said. So Iwahig is subdivided into 4 zones or districts. The Central South Colony with the area of 14,000 hectares. Next is the Santa Lucia with 9,685 hectares. Montebol with 8,000 hectares and Inawagan with 13,000 hectares. So to continue, the Correctional Institute for Women, in a report dated January 22, 1959, submitted to a committee created by Administrative Order 287 by the President of the Philippines, it was noted that before a separate building was constructed especially for women prisoners, all female convicts were confined at the Old Bilibid Prison in Azcaraga Street, Manila. So as what I have said earlier about the Old Bilibid Prison, the female convicts are separated from the male convicts, wherein they are also classified as, or according to their either they are inmates or prisoners. So they are situated or they are confined at Old Bilibid Prison in Azcaraga Street, Manila. So the male prisoners were confined in dormitories near the women's quarters. Because of these conditions, vocational activities of the women prisoners are limited to embroidery. So women are not allowed to perform or to work such as carpentry and other livelihood that a man can do. So their work is limited only to embroidery, and they are separated from the quarters that are not in or they are not together with the men. So the men are confined in the dormitories while they are confined in quarters separated by walls. So here is the logo for the CIW, or Correctional Institution for Women and the Bureau of Corrections. So on February 14, 1931, the Correctional Institution for Women, or CIW, was born. So on February 14, 1931, this was the first established act of correctional institution for women. It is administered and managed by a penal superintendent. It was the sole institution dedicated to women offenders serving more than 3 years imprisonment. So the CIW first housed 270 inmates before, who originally came from the Old Bilibid compound. So it was in 1982 when a fire blazed through the CIW due to faulty wiring which practically destroyed the main facility. So before, as what I have said about the Old Bilibid prison, it was um, already overcrowded, so they um, made this institution, or they administered this CIW, or the Correctional Institution for Women, wherein the CIW housed 270 inmates. But because of during the 1892, because of the faulty wiring, the building was uh, destroyed, or the main facility has been destroyed. So more than a year later, reconstruction was completed, and on September 26, 1983, a new building was erected. So after the destruction of the fireplace, more than a year later, there was a re-establishment or reconstruction of the building. So by September 22, 1983, a new building for the Correctional Institution for Women has been erected. So over the decades, the number of inmates ballooned exponentially, but the facilities remained the same. So the CIW inmates grew to more than 2,000 from 270 inmates in 1931. Dormitories with single beds had to be replaced with two bunk beds that could accommodate 4 people at a time. So over a decade, it is expected that a certain prison system, or yes, a penal system, would increase in number. So from 270 inmates were in the CIW housed, it grew into 2,000. So the single bed, or single beds before turned, or was converted or replaced by two bunk beds that could accommodate 4 people at a time. So imagine the growing population of the CIW, or the women offenders, during that time. So when they became ill, the women are confined in a separate building which serve as a hospital with nurses and prison physicians. So they also have this medical assistance, as what I have talked about my report about the acts or the rights of a prisoner. So when the prison or women prisoners needed surgery, they were operated at the Bilibid prison. After the operation, they were transferred to the infirmary for convalescence, and prison authorities were aware of the conditions that women prisoners had to endure. Consequently, the transfer of the women to separate sites became inevitable. So after a series of negotiations started by Prison Director Ramon Victorio, the Philippine Legislature passed Act number 3579 in November 1929. It authorized the transfer of all women inmates to a building in Welfareville in Mandaluyong, Rizal, and appropriated 6,000 for the move. So because of Ramon Victorio, or Prison Director Ramon Victorio, because as what I have observed about the CIW, that it has been overcrowded, he allocated 6,000 budget for the in order for the transfer of the women inmates in building to a building in Welfareville, Mandaluyong, Rizal. So this is the correctional institution for women. CIW, according to Senate support, occupied 18 hectares. Original structure was a one-story building which housed the office, the brigades, mess hall, kitchen, chapel, infirmary, bathrooms, and employees' restrooms. So this is the main structure, or the common structure, or the standard structure of every penal system. So the building has a central courtyard with trees and flowering plants. So this is what I have shown in the picture in the first slide. So the prisoners vocational activities were expanded to include poultry and piggery, as well as cultivation of crops, flowers, and fruits. So from embroidery, their vocational activities turned into, or expanded into, poultry and piggery, growing or cultivation of crops and flowers and fruits. So living quarters for the institution's employees were later constructed in the compound. So during the Japanese occupation, the CIW, despite a drastic reduction in the number of its employees, continued with its work. So after the war, the CIW resumed its normal operations. So Weekly catechism classes were introduced. A dental clinic was built. Local telephones were installed in the guards' quarters, and the Bureau of Public Works made major repairs on the buildings, and a workshop and infirmary were constructed for the inmates' use. So in 2000, a four-story building was constructed by the Department of Public Works within the grounds of CIW. So the it has a continuous, or the CIW experienced a continuous growing population. So by year 2000, they um, constructed another four-story building for the CIW, or for the um, female convicts. It is the growing congestion in the facility. The CIW, with a capacity of for only 200 inmates, had to accommodate 1,000 inmates. So that's how fast the population growth in the CIW. So let's proceed to the new Bilibid prison. So this was the reconstruction, or the um, development of the old Bilibid prison. So the projected increase in the prison population prompted the government to plan and develop a new site for the National Penitentiary. So the growing urbanization of Manila and constant lobbying by conservative groups fueled the idea of transferring the old Bilibid prison to a new site, which at that time was considered remote and on the outskirts of the urban center. So before, the old Bilibid prison was situated in Muntinlupa, Manila. Accordingly, Commonwealth Act number 67 was enacted, appropriating 1 million pesos for the construction of a new national prison in Muntinlupa. So this is the new Bilibid prison, was the reconstruction of the old Bilibid prison, still in Muntinlupa City. So in November 15, 1940, all inmates of the old Bilibid prison in Manila were transferred to a new site. So that's the year, November 15, 1940. That's the date, or that's the time where the new Bilibid prison was being established and used. So the new institution had a capacity of 3,000 prisoners, and it was officially named the New Bilibid Prison in January 22, 1941. So it can accommodate now 3,000 prisoners. So the prison reservation had an area of 587 hectares, part of which was arable. So the prison compound proper had an area of 300 by 300 meters, or a total of 9 hectares, and it was surrounded by 3 layers of barbed wire, so as their form of security. So the institution became the maximum security compound in the 20th and continues to be so. The camp houses not only death convicts and inmates sentenced to life term, but also those with numerous pending cases, multiple convictions, and sentences for more than 20 years. So this is the main reason why there is a continuous growth, or there is an overpopulation in every prison system. It's because of the trials, or for those convicts who are still waiting for trials. So they would be added to the population in every prisons. So this is the aerial view of the New Bilibid prison. After the World War II, there was a surfeit of steel matting in the inventory, and it was used to improve the security fence. So before, the security system of the old Bilibid, or the New Bilibid prison, was only a barbed wire. But after the World War II, there was a surface steel matting in the inventory, and there was a new inventory for the fencing, or the security fence of the New Bilibid prison. So in the late 20s, fences were further reinforced with concrete slabs. In 1980s, the height of the concrete wall was increased, and another facility was constructed 2.5 kilometers from the main building. So this became known as the Camp Sampaguita, or the medium security camp. On January 22, 1941, electric chair was transferred to New Bilibid prison. So the death chamber was constructed in the rear area of the camp, where the mode of execution was through electrocution. Today, it is a security zone where those convicted of drug offenses are held. So before, since the death penalty was approved, so they have this death chambers, and electric chairs, or the punishment or the style of punishment was through electrocution. So the NBP expanded with the construction of new security facilities. These were the medium security camp, which was used as a military stockade during martial law, and the minimum security camp whose first site was Crescent Bukang Liwayway. So this was transferred to another site within the reservation where the former depot was situated. So the increase in prison population has affected the segregation system. Several foreign funded projects that the prison reservation, and among them the halfway house and juvenile training center. So both projects are supported from funds from Japan through the representation of the Interdisciplinary Committee of NAPOLCOM. So the Japan, however, gave some supported funds for these projects, which helps a lot here in the Philippines, especially in our prison system. Okay, next is the Davao Penal Colony. So the Davao Penal Colony is the first penal settlement founded and organized under Filipino administration. So the rest of the 7 penal agencies in the Philippines was under the Spanish regime, or under the American administration. But this Davao Penal Colony was the first settlement founded and organized under a Filipino administration. So the settlement, which originally had an area of approximately 30,000 hectares in the districts of Panabo and Tagum, Davao del Norte, was formally established on January 21, 1932 by virtue of Act number 3732. So this act authorized the Governor General to lease or sell the lands, buildings, and improvements in San Ramon Prison and Iwahig Penal Colony. So it was also granted authority to the Secretary of Justice to establish a new prison and penal colony in a suitable public land. So a budget of 500,000 was allocated. So in order for this to realize the projects authorized by the Governor General, so they allocated 500,000. So several committees were created to pick a suitable site for the penal settlement. So this was the phase of the Davao Penal Colony way back before. So in accordance with the recommendation of these committees, Governor Dwight Davis signed Proclamation number 414 on October 7, 1931, which reserved a site for the penal colony in Davao Province in Mindanao. So the site offered ideal conditions for agricultural activity. So this is the main purpose also of having penal colonies, was to generate agricultural activities and livelihood for the convicts. So during the World War II, the colony was converted into a concentration camp where more than 1,000 Japanese internees were committed by the Philippine American Armed Forces. So the Japanese were treated in accordance with the orders of the American commanding officer. So on December 20, 1941, the Japanese Imperial Forces attacked Davao, and the colony was among the establishments taken over by the invading army. So there was an invasion happened during the World War II, and the Davao Penal Colony was one of the invaded by the army. So the entire settlement was thrown into confusion, and a great number of prisoners escaped. So because of the World War II, a lot of prisoners escaped. Normal operations were inevitably disturbed. On November 8, 1942, a representative of the Director of Prisons transferred the colony and its properties to the Japanese authorities. The remaining colony employees, their families, and the inmates evacuated to Iwahig, where they originally organized the Davao Penal Colony at Inawagan Sub-Colony, Palawan. So the organization of the colony in exile was authorized by virtue of Memorandum Order number 60 dated June 28, 1943, and signed by the Director of Prisons. So after the liberation of the Philippines, the colony in exile in Palawan returned to its old site in Davao. A great or a great deal of rebuilding and repair had to be done because the war had almost completely destroyed the colony. So after the World War II, there was a reconstruction, or there was a rebuilding and repair of the penal system, or the prison, or the Davao Penal Colony, because it almost disturbed the whole facility because of the war. So that would be all for the rest of the topics under the 7 agencies of the Philippines, or the 7 penal agencies in the Philippines.